Thank you all for joining us. I'm here in Nations Way where our connection is not the best, so I apologize in advance for that. I might have to go off camera to participate. But today we're excited to kick off our Women in Technology programming. I know that there's been a lot of wonderful energy, focus groups, and thinking and support around how to have a more inclusive culture for our women in technology. And one thing that we wanted to make sure we didn't do was only pull together the women in technology to talk about this. We understand that it's something that all of our leaders should really own, male or female. So yesterday we actually kicked off directors and above inclusive leadership training in conjunction with this session one that we're having today. So we're excited. I wanted to make sure you guys knew that it wasn't only just women in tech specific session that we're doing, that we're also thinking about this in a broader way. But we're excited to have this. I know that we are extremely open to feedback, not only on today's session, but other ways that we can continue to drive a culture of inclusion and a sense of belonging. Dr. Megan Pollock is an expert. I could not do her enough justice in an intro, but I will share a story that I shared yesterday. But I saw her TED Talk and it just struck me as spot on in terms of discussing belonging. She'll actually be joining Ramana at the Idea Summit that's coming up at the end of the month in a discussion about belonging and what that means and why it's important to be supportive. You guys are fortunate in that I know for sure Ramana is a leader in technology who wants to see more women in tech, wants to be a strong advocate and ally for women in tech. And so this investment in time is important to him. It's important to my team. And with no further ado, I will pass it off. Thank you for joining.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. And I'm so grateful that you have entrusted me and my team to lead this conversation. I do want to say good morning. My name is Megan Pollock. As Kimberly said, I'm based out of Dallas, Texas, and I come to this work as an engineer. So I used to work for Texas Instruments, and then I shifted my career from widgets to workshops about 12 years ago and went to work on my doctorate, really with the desire and the passion to figure out how to transform the culture of engineering to create more equitable and inclusive spaces for women and people of color to not only enter into and succeed, but to thrive and to feel like they are valued and affirmed and that they belong in that space. I want to introduce a couple of my colleagues who I have with me today. We have with us Fantasy Nicole. She and I were connected through our grad school programs, and she is also an engineer. She worked in manufacturing, and I think you'll get to sort of hear pieces of our stories as we engage in our conversation today. And Fantasy is currently working on her doctorate in engineering education systems and design at Arizona State University. You want to say hi, Fantasy?
Hey, y'all. Hey.
I also want to introduce to you another engineering colleague of mine. This is Kathleen Fitzpatrick. She's based out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. And Kathleen and I have worked together for the last 6 years. She's also an engineer. And so she started her career at Hewlett Packard and then took time off to care for her twin daughters. And then when she returned to the workforce, I was really thrilled to get to have her work on my team. And we worked on equity work around STEM equity. And so we've done that together for the last 6 years. Kathleen, you want to say hi?
Good morning, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I love these conversations, and I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone has to share. And it's going to be an exciting and fast session, I'm sure.
Never enough time. I also want to introduce you to my colleague, Casey Haig. She's based out of New Orleans, and she is going to be acting as our Zoom producer today. When she's not Zoom producing, she runs an improv theater in New Orleans, and she is an actor. And so she's been teaching and performing for a decade or so. And so I'm really excited to have her. She did tell me that she's going to have her camera off just because she needs to do that today. But you can ping her if you need her. What to expect today? We got 90 minutes together. So you can expect to be engaged in a discussion, an interactive workshop kind of setting. We are going to use some Slido polls. We're going to have breakout room discussions. We'll have some large group debriefs. And I'm going to follow up with you all with some additional resources as well. And so our goal today and what we have come together to do is to have a conversation about belonging and about authenticity and what we experience as women in technology and fields. And I get that all of you may not be engineers. So even though I've set us up to be engineers and the name of my company is Engineer Inclusion, really, I mean engineer as a verb, right? We are trying to intentionally engineer inclusion in our environments. And no matter who we are, we all have the ability to actively and intentionally facilitate belonging for ourselves and for others as well. And so that's where we're going to focus our energy. Also, because we're going to have another opportunity to meet a month from now, I really value your feedback. So even some of the feedback that people provided me yesterday, I took that and adapted what we are doing today. So you will all have more time to talk and to reflect based on that feedback. So I love feedback. Please be ready to share that with me. We do have an evaluation. And so, be ready to share some thoughts with us. To get started, I want to do just a kind of a setting to help us understand. If you've never used Slido, it's quite easy. I think because of COVID, we all know, I think, what QR codes are now. But just in case, grab a smartphone and hold it over the QR code. Open up the little pop-up browser. So open your camera, QR code, hold it over, pop up the browser. And once you got that open, we're there for the next 90 minutes. You don't ever have to use another QR code. It will just refresh every time a new poll comes up. So my first question for you is to let us know, in which state or country are you located today? And so I think it will generate a word cloud for us. All right, we got some concentration in Colorado and Florida, in California. Got some people in the UK and in India, in Canada. All right, people from all over. And so you can see in the top right, it gives us a number of how many people are participating in the poll. So that lets me know that there are about 15, 16 of you who haven't quite accessed it yet. So I want to give you another chance to queue it up if you want. So try it out. And then the next question is going to be in one word to tell us what your role is, but wait for that cue here in a second. We'll go ahead and move forward to that now. So in one word, what is your role at Fanatics? So I'm doing one word because that's how we're going to get a word cloud. Because if you tell me you're like awesome titles, we'll have no like consensus on that. So tell us about one word. What's your role at Fanatics? We got some tech leads, PMs, quality engineers, QA, HR, got a variety of different kinds of engineers and product managers, scientists, security. Nice. Software engineers, quality engineers. Cool. All right. Well, so you're going to get the hang of this, and we'll use this for some polling features throughout the workshop, and it just gives us a sense of who's here. Oh, we're up to 40 people. All right. If you haven't figured it out, you will get a chance to do that. I want to introduce to you sort of what I call a session pledge. And this is really a way of just sort of situating our conversation today and creating some group norms, some shared agreements. And the reason why we do this is every group naturally develops some normative behaviors. And there are expectations, there are unwritten rules. And these are in our meetings, these are on our teams, these are in even, things when we come together briefly like this. And so we encourage people to intentionally set or establish norms because it scaffolds equitable and inclusive practices. And so you can use ours as an example, or you can go to my website and use them to create your own. But there are a couple of things that you can download there. And so created this sort of simple 4S alliteration to help us get started. And so I want to encourage you to stay engaged. We get, about 90 minutes together. We know that your jobs don't stop, but do whatever you can to be as engaged in our conversations. I encourage you to share the mic. When we go into our breakout rooms, we're going to encourage you to make sure that you're doing true sort of round robin processes so that one person doesn't hog the mic, because I can be a mic hogger. Maybe that's why I became a professional speaker and teacher, who knows? But we want to make sure that we're making space and we're inviting people who are on the margins to share their ideas. We want to be really supportive of each other. Because of some of the questions and prompts that we have for you, it's really possible that it could be kind of triggering and remind you of some of the trauma that you've experienced. And so we want to be really supportive of others. If someone shares their story with you, believe them. If someone shares something that's happened to you, be really thoughtful to the language that you choose in response, and to not deny that it happened. You could be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened, right? That's a shock and awe, but don't be like, no, you misunderstood that. Really believe someone when they tell you their story, because I'm sure all of you have experienced in your life when you share something and someone says that and it doesn't feel good, right? We want to be really supportive. Also, because we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, everybody is on a different place in their journey and this work. And so be supportive of people who may be still learning some of the vocabulary and learning some of the language as we go through this. And then the last prompt I have for you is to sort of warm up and get ready to stretch and reflect. And let's see what we can do and accomplish today. Anything, team, you want to add to this before we get started? All good? Okay. All right. So we want to push you into a breakout room straight away to kind of set a tone for what it is that we want to accomplish. And so we're going to place you into small groups, random groups of about 3. We want you to do a quick round of introductions if you don't know each other. And then we want you to, again, do a round where everyone briefly responds to the first prompt. So everybody gets a chance of that. And then everybody goes to the next question. Okay. Because we don't want one person to just power through all 3 questions and then nobody else shares. And the questions I have for you is, 1, I want you to share something great, something exciting that's happened in your life. Let's just start on a really positive tone of just share something awesome. It doesn't have to be work related. It could be completely random, but just something that you're excited about. Next, I want you to share one goal that you have for your career. And then again, round robin, everybody gets a turn. I want you to share one way that you've supported a woman colleague at Fanatics and helping them to reach their goals. Okay. So again, remember to stay engaged, share the mic, support others, and stretch and reflect. And Casey has dropped into the chat the instructions. And so once you get into the breakout room, I'm going to share this screen too. So you'll have this right in front of you. But again, try to be as engaged as you can in these conversations. And we'll give you about 7 minutes to work through these the best that you can. All right. We'll see you back in a few minutes.
Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back. All right. So as is always the case, there's never enough time to finish a conversation. We do hope, however, that you got to either meet some new people or just to share in something exciting that has happened for someone. And so to me, it's always a really great place to start because, first of all, we are people that have lives outside of work, and it's always nice to be reminded of those things. It's always nice to speak our goals out into the world so other people can hear them. And hopefully it was encouraging also to kind of reflect on ways that we've been able to help other people. Now, I want you to kind of hold on to that because we're going to build on this sort of notion of the ways in which we support others moving through the conversation. Now, Kimberly mentioned in the beginning that yesterday we had a workshop on inclusive leadership. And we talked about inclusive leadership with about 60 people yesterday. And just in case you don't know what that is, inclusive leadership, why it's important, I'm going to give you a definition here in a second, is that it facilitates belongingness, which is something we're going to talk about. It helps people feel valued. It enhances performance. It improves collaboration, it boosts attendance, and it reduces turnover, particularly when we're hearing, like 4.4 million people left their jobs last month. And we're thinking about all of the, amazing number of people who continue to resign and move on to different opportunities over the last couple of years. It's really startling when you compare it to sort of pre-pandemic numbers. And I think that so much of that can be mitigated by becoming a more inclusive leader. And so whether you are a leader or a manager, or if you have no power at all of us can help to facilitate belongingness for people around us. And so what inclusive leadership is it's a set of leadership behaviors that focus on facilitating group members feeling part of the group, retaining their sense of individuality, and while also allowing people to contribute to the processes and outcomes of the group. And so Casey has added into the chat the link from yesterday's handout if you are interested in having a look at that. There's no secret to what we did. We want you to have access to that if you want. And so what we talked about and what we're going to sort of segue into for all of us to think about is, what does it feel like to belong while being your authentic self and being a valuable part of a team? And so Kimberly mentioned my TED Talk that I gave a few months ago. And in that talk, I shared some of my experience in having left industry. And what's sort of interesting about my sort of life and story is I grew up in a house full of boys. I grew up playing a male-dominated sport. I was a competitive powerlifter for 18 years. And I had always been surrounded in those kinds of environments. And it wasn't until I left industry and really began to sort of unpack and interrogate all the ways that I had not been myself, all the ways that I had sort of shifted and changed to belong in those spaces, that really gave me such a big question of concern. And I always relate it to this sort of square peg in a round hole. And this image is a triangular peg. But I realized that in my effort and determination, right, like sheer determination to be a part of the group, to really force belonging, because nobody was going to tell me I didn't belong, right? I was certain that I was going to do whatever I could to be an active part of that team. And so it can feel sometimes overwhelming when we look around and we say everyone else fits this and then we don't. I have a distinct memory of an offsite that we did when I was working at TI. And we all did Myers-Briggs, and I think everybody kind of knows what Myers-Briggs is. And if you aren't familiar, the majority of engineers are ISTJs. How many of you are an ISTJ or something of that? So what they did at this offsite, now, this is a terrible practice, so please don't ever do this. They had this huge wall that they had like the 16 different categories, and then they had 8.5 by 11 print offs with like our names in giant letters, and they put us in the 16 categories. So take a wild guess what that wall might have looked like. I wish I had a photo of it. This is pre-iCloud. So what it looked like on that wall was like all of my colleagues over in like the sort of ISTJ, and then way at the very end was Megan and ENFP. So here I am at this offsite, and I'm like, I already know I don't really fit in and belong. And now there is this tremendous, huge wall, like of a visualization that says, Megan doesn't fit in. She's the different one. And I was like, this does not feel good, right? Like, and then I went and talked to the facilitator, and I was like, I'm really feeling different and like isolated in this moment. And he's trying to tell me like how special it is. And I'm like, I hear you, but I still am not feeling real great right now, right? And so how many of you have ever experienced that feeling of like, wow, I'm really different than everyone? And it doesn't mean it's bad, but it's that feeling of like, I am the outsider in this situation. I see some hands. Thank you so much for that. And so, and it doesn't feel good, right? But then it creates this determination of like, how much harder do I have to work? Do I have to be something different? And what happens in your brain is a lot of this is happening unconsciously, right? It is unconsciously happening. It takes over our cognitive control, and it becomes this shadow job of trying to fit in, of trying to assimilate into a culture that is not our own, right? We are not part of a dominant culture. And so what happens if okay, so let me give you an example. How many of you have ever been through a moment in time, let's say a global pandemic, where you've got a lot on your mind and you're struggling, like trying to do a lot of things and you're really stressed? How does that affect your work? It affects you, right? Like sometimes you literally can't stop thinking about these things. And so those are the conscious things. But now if you've got all of these unconscious things that are taking over your capacity to have control over your thought, it becomes this shadow job. It can become very performative. Now, why I bring this up is that if we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, belongingness and feeling like friendship and love is right in the middle. So we need to have like physiological needs taken care of. We need to have our safety needs taken care of. But before we can have any self-actualization to like achieve something, before we can have any kind of confidence and courage and like internal worth to move forward with something, we have to experience these feelings of love and belongingness. We have to experience the sense of connection with the place that we work. And so this can't be a forced thing. Even if we are trying to fit in, right? We can force belongingness. We can say, I deserve to be here. Of course I belong here. That's very different. A true sense of belongingness. Think about that for a second. I'm going to give you a chance, and we're going to go into a breakout here in a second to reflect on belongingness. But if you think about how you feel at work, and sometimes if you've not really thought deeply about this, sometimes it can be pushing on lots of feelings of preservation of like, I'm fine, I don't need help, you know, I fit in. But again, it wasn't until I left industry that I had this realization of, if you go back to the image of the sort of triangle, it was like I had shaved off parts of myself. I'd lost parts of myself in an effort and a determination to fit. And so that's the question I want you to think about today, is how are we doing that to ourselves and what's the cost of it? You know, Fantasy, you brought up something earlier in our conversation about people who may not be like me, who may not be trying to fit in. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I can. Hi, everyone. Sorry if my voice sounds a little, I'm battling a sinus infection right now. But I worked in industry as a manufacturing engineer. I was I was the only Black woman that was in my particular organization. It was like a stamping engineering organization of 128 people. I was the only Black woman. I was one of 3 Black people and one of 6 women. And that was like what I could visibly see in terms of diversity. I'm not speaking on other hidden aspects of diversity, but I did not try to fit in. I was from the South. I'm from Mississippi. I was living I had moved to Michigan, and I was in the automotive industry. And it was very interesting because all people wanted to do at work was talk about cars, wanted to talk about sports, or they wanted to talk about their families. And mind you, like, I have no issue with any of these, but I didn't really relate because I've been single for a long time. I don't have children. I don't really play sports. I play video games, but I don't play sports. And I just always kind of felt like excluded. And I also, like, as you can see, you know, if I turn my camera off, you can see that I have like these long locks in. And then if you see this now, I'm like bald headed with a different color. But I was always just the type of person where I was like, I was going to come in and I was going to be myself, and you could either accept it or not accept it. And a lot of times it was somewhat accepted, but I always got a lot of comments like, well, why do you do so much with your hair? Why do you dress this way? I also do plus size modeling, y'all. By the way, I probably should have said that. But it's like, why do you always dress so nice? Like, we're just coming in to sit down. Like, why do you, change your hair every week? And I'm like, because I want to. So then I started kind of getting a reputation around the office of being like not really engaged, but it wasn't that I wasn't engaged. It was just that I could not relate to a lot of the things that were being talked about. And so I did not feel like I really had a sense of belonging. I never felt intentionally excluded, but it just kind of happened because of the things that were talked about, the group norms that I wasn't trying to assimilate to. And so eventually I just started kind of like hanging with myself, going to lunch by myself, sitting at the table by myself, like just doing different things like that. So then the narrative around me became, well, Fantasy's the only Black woman and she acts like she doesn't want to be here, which wasn't the issue, actually. It was the fact that I did not fit the group norms and I refused to assimilate. So a lot of times you have people who kind of start having these narratives created around them about how they function in workplaces and things like that. But a lot of times it's because they just refuse to assimilate. So you have issues on both ends of the spectrum, whether you're trying to assimilate and you start shaving off pieces of yourself, or whether you're resistant and you say, I'm going to keep myself, but then what else does that come with? Like, at what cost am I like preserving myself in this particular work environment?
Thanks so much for sharing your story, Fantasy. And Kathleen, you talked a little bit about too the sort of implicit understanding or ways in which we are. Let me tell a story that cues you up. One of my mentors, I saw her at an event years ago, and she was talking. She had just introduced me to another woman who had like gotten this big promotion at work. And my mentor sort of like turned it away from me, and she was talking to this other woman for whom she had mentored. And she said, remember, be a man. I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I like freaked out. And she's like, Megan, that wasn't for you. She's like, my hope is different for your generation, but for this woman today, like for her to survive and to be successful in this, that's still my advice. And it like shattered my world, right? Because it was a completely different message than what she had given me. And when Kathleen sort of shared her story earlier, I connected to that. So go ahead.
Yes. So good morning, everyone. So I am of that generation that came out of the women's movement. And so we were told that we could do or be anything that we wanted to be. My freshman year was the first class of women at Claremont Men's College. So there were 50 of us women at an all men's college. And I went on to get my engineering degree in same as Fantasy in manufacturing. And so worked in manufacturing as the only woman on the production floor, moved up in promotions, and always felt like I needed to act like a man. Back then I wore ties, dressed very simply, didn't wear any makeup, felt like I needed to downplay my femininity as much as I could. And when I moved into management, I found that because I was not being my authentic self, that people accused me of being fake or inauthentic. And it's true, I wasn't being authentic because I didn't feel like I could be. I felt like I needed to behave like a man. So I apologize. I'm in my mother's house and she's in the hospital and her phone's ringing now. Anyway, so I think it's important for us to really find our own authentic self. And when I finally came to that point, was a lot happier in the work that I was doing. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Kathleen's struggling a lot right now. I think her mom is still in the ICU this morning. So I got a prompt for us. I want you to think about, on a scale of 1 to 10, to what extent do you experience true feelings of belongingness in the workplace? So to what extent, looks like we got about 14 people participated.
Do you want us to share?
You can. This is a poll, so I'm collecting.
Oh, okay.
Show us the scale, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. We got 33 people participated.
I think it depends on what group, how big of a bubble your context of the question is.
Mm-hmm. And I think it depends on the team too, right? Like when it depends on what team, every team has its own culture based on the people, based on the leadership. And we can experience lots of different feelings of belongingness and for whom you're, regularly connecting with. All right, so thank you all for sharing here. We've got a pretty strong participation. Now, the next question, and this really connects to some of the other things that we were talking about around this sort of notion of authenticity. And so I'll cue that up. But, being our authentic self means that, like Fantasy talked about, one of the things I love about Fantasy is that like she is always her authentic self. And I'm always learning from her because there's something in me that has like this must assimilate, must like try and fit in kind of thing. But she doesn't. And I just admire that about her. And so I want you to think about in this next poll, how authentic do you think you truly are at work, right? And again, you may not have thought about this much, but when on my team at TI, I remember like on my first day, I never watched TV even before I became an engineer, but in order for me to like have conversations with my colleagues at lunch, I had to start watching The Office because they all talked about pop culture back then. I had to watch the games on Thursday night and Sundays, the football games, so I could talk about the scores. I also never cursed until I became an engineer, but like now I can't stop. But that was part of the culture of my team. And so I had to like take on a lot of new behaviors to sort of fit in with him. And so think about that for a second. We've got 28 people. I'll click it here in just a second to kind of get a scale of how much we think we're being authentic at work. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. So a good portion of us feel like we're being pretty authentic. That's amazing. It's amazing. And I think that, the more that we get to model that, like Fantasy models how to like literally models, but also models how to be authentic is a great example for us. It also brings the big question of like, and what's the cost, right? And what's the cost? Could that be? Kristen brings the truth. I would not be perceived as nice if I was truly authentic. Kristen, you want to talk a little bit more about that and share?
Sure. I think a lot of people would feel the same way, but it's totally not. It's very truthful. I think there's a lot of tampering down my what I would consider my authentic feelings, and part of that is professionalism. I don't want that to be confused, but I think there is more give on my end than some of my business partners and counterparts. Men tend to get away with being curt or saying something inappropriate way more frequently. Well, women are more sensitive to it. So whereas I would withhold something and phrase it in a different way, men get away with just saying, especially I work with operations. I just want to be clear. The group of people is a little bit different than engineers. Engineers tend to be a little bit more passive aggressive, whereas operators I have found to be overtly aggressive. So it's definitely a tap dance I have to do to work between the two groups.
It almost sounds like you're talking about the complaint that we get
if we are assertive, if we have opinions, that we are now aggressive.
100%. Whereas
Yeah.
a man does not have to battle that.
Oh yeah, I get that one constantly, that I'm too aggressive in my ideas, and I'm too knowing of what I'm trying to do, and I don't think like they do. Yeah, it's still unfortunate, but it's 100% true. My last company, which I left for, was just the same guy over again 8 times, all white guys, same age, from the same state. And I was constantly getting asked why I didn't think the way they did. I was like, well, for one thing, I'm not from Washington State. I'm from Georgia. Let's start there. But yeah, constantly getting told that you're aggressive when all you're doing is providing an opinion as a person who is knowledgeable in your field.
Thank you for sharing that. We've got some great comments in the chat from Devin and Serby.
Yeah, I think it just speaks to the fine line that we put on ourselves to walk, and then, you know, there's external pressure to walk as well.
Yeah.
Quick
So
question, Megan, do you have some best practices in the moment to, not necessarily to like react, but the right way to respond to these circumstances and situations that I think so many of us often feel?
Like when we're told to stop being happy or just being aggressive.
Yeah. Is there a way to kind of, not in a witty way or sharp or snappy way, but is there a way to kind of reflect that back to someone so that they can hear themselves and what they're saying?
Yeah, so the best advice I can give is to ask a question, ask a really reflective question, and say like, well, how exactly would you have phrased it? And so you give them a chance to spotlight their expertise. And it can sometimes draw out some of the gender or racial biases that can happen in those kinds of conversations. And by asking a question, it doesn't feel like an attack. And it feels like you're trying to elevate, you know, if someone says something ugly, you don't want to spotlight it, right? But if someone says, you know, tells you to stop being aggressive, or if someone, the comment in the chat of like, I'm not being happy and fun at work, I'm not perceived as serious, you know, something like that can say of like, well, what is it about enjoying my work that really challenges that? And then in that case, let me first say that there are so many complexities here around power, right? And how comfortable you feel speaking truth to power and the risk of it. You know, if this person has power over your position, power over your progression, power over you in any kind of way, there's always going to be a risk in saying something if they aren't ready and willing to hear it. But again, I find the way of sort of asking questions and prompting that back and saying, well, what is it about being happy and fun that truly makes you think I'm not serious? And invite them to then become an advocate for you and sort of challenge that perception, right? If you're getting pushback on something like that behavior, and say, well, what if we thought about this differently? One of the things that we talked about in the workshop yesterday was helping the leaders to build an asset mindset. And so you could take that back and spin it and say, like, in what ways could we re-envision my happiness and my ability to be fun at work as an asset to the team, rather than something that takes away from somebody's experience? And so fantasy, go ahead. Somebody was going to chime in.
So one of the things that I really struggle with as a woman in tech is that oftentimes these types of conversations are held in women in tech events where women are basically taking time out of their workday to attend these events. But the people that need to hear this information are the men that we work with. And there was a suggestion. I attended NC Wet a few years ago, And they're like, honestly, you should all send your male leaders to these conferences. Let them experience being a gender minority at a conference. Let them experience them having to take time out of their workday to attend an event where they learn about all of the things they perpetuate that are, causing their female employees to leave. So my big thing is, I'm sitting here and, this is time I could be working on code, and my male coworkers are the ones that need to be hearing all of this because they're the ones that can actually do something about it. And they're the ones working on their stuff right now. And sometimes I also feel like when women, with these advertisements are, advertised and we're going to be attending these things, it just kind of further separates us. Because I don't have an issue fitting in. I mean, I come in, I cuss a lot. I've got piercings, blue hair, tons of tattoos. I play roller derby. I can talk about bourbon, I can talk about beer. So I am treated the same as any other male engineer until it's like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this. I have a women in tech event. And then all of a sudden I'm a woman in tech as opposed to just their coworker. So my question, just for fanatics in general, is when are we going to have a day where all of the men have to attend a session on their unconscious bias and not so unconscious bias, and we get to work?
I love
Devin,
that.
thank
I
you.
could not agree with you more, Devin. I just wanted to say that. And I love
Yes.
support in the chat. And that's why we started with yesterday, having directors and above, everyone male, listening to inclusive leadership, because I'm a huge believer in the same, that it's not up to the women to figure out how to make the culture better. However, I do believe there's power in community and practical tools to be able to, think through and talk through some of this. So I couldn't agree with you more.
I think the other thing is if I took some of the verbal or written responses that I've received and reciprocated that back out to the person at them, it would be a whole different ball game. But it's accepted when it's done to you, not reciprocate. It's not accepted at all, reciprocated.
I would say that is 100% true unless I in my previous position I was kind of influenced by some drugs that I was on, and my boss was explaining to me how I did such a great job at administering all the projects, and he really felt that I wasn't in the right role, that maybe I should be a PM or a supervisor. And I said, but I'm technical and I really enjoy that part. Are you saying I'm not good at being technical? And he's like, well, I just really think that you're so amazing at organizing everything and all this stuff. And I said, well, you're a sexist. And he goes, what? I said, no, you heard me. I said, you're a sexist. And I couldn't believe I said that, but I did. I thought I was going to get fired. And he goes, I can't be a sexist because I have girls. And I just sat there and I said, that's not really how that works, but all right, we're going to end the conversation now. So I found that if you get them off surprise, sometimes you can kind of get away with a little bit. Not that I'm suggesting it, but yeah, I mean, reflecting back is supposed to be the right way to do it. I just don't know how to do it in a manner that is appropriate. I mean, that's really the thing, right? We're supposed to reflect it back to them saying, so how am I supposed to do this in the expectation that you have? What is it that I'm supposed to be doing differently to be like you? Understanding that I didn't have the same background.
See, that still puts the work on you though. And
it does.
I just have a major issue with that is just all of these things are strategies that we're supposed to be doing and we shouldn't have to.
Yeah. So Devin and Michelle, thank you and so much for sharing this. And Kimberly and Laura and I talked about this as we got ready for the event of how important it is for me. And I talked about it with my team as well, is that the onus should not be on us to change the systems that oppress us, right? And so I have this slide up here to kind of introduce the notion of the 4 eyes of oppression, because this is what we're up against, right? Like we're up against a tremendous system that includes the things of like, you know, deep ideological things like, you know, beliefs about, you know, what women should do and what people should do. And so I hear you, right? It is not our job to change the systems that oppress us. And yes, it was important for us when I talked with Kimberly and Laura to talk about how are we approaching this from an institutional lens to begin to change some of the systems. And so I really believe that they're doing that. I also understand your, you know, thought of not coming to events. And I will share that when I was, you know, I was in college a long time between bachelor's, master's, and my doctorate. And throughout all of that, not once did I ever go to a women in engineering event. Even though I was actually in a program called Women in Engineering because I went to a women's university for my undergrad. But like I never went to like those Society of Women Engineer things. And for just the reason that you said, like, I don't need to remind people that I'm a woman. Like I'm trying to fit in. I'm trying to be part of this. Like I don't need help. Like I kept saying that. And I had a mentor at TI, and she ran the manufacturing, worldwide manufacturing. And she says, Megan, you're going to go to the Women in Engineering group. And I said, no, I'm good. Like, I don't need help. I'm fine. And she's like, first of all, you don't say no to a senior vice president. And second of all, like, you're going. And so I went, and I remember this truly visceral feeling because it was this enormous like boardroom table with these big, bulky, ridiculous chairs in a room that was too small for that table and all those chairs. And I'm sitting around all these women, and I didn't work in the manufacturing group. So they were people, all new people to me. And they started sharing their stories. And it was a moment for me in which I truly feel like my rose-colored glasses of what it felt like to be a woman in engineering were ripped off. And I was like, oh, you mean that's not supposed to happen? Oh, you mean that's inappropriate? Oh, you mean, like, it was just this moment of like, oh my gosh, like these women are experiencing the same thing I'm experiencing. And even though I had not put like words to how I had felt before, I felt and built a camaraderie with them. And so that was such an important and pivotal moment for me. And that's the value of these kinds of opportunities is finding support and finding your belongingness. And again, like, I feel like, you know, Devin, you and I could share some similarity of like, I was able to do all of those things too. But in hindsight, again, when I left, I was like, yeah, I didn't really like any of that. You know, like I did it because I thought I was supposed to. And I was bound and determined to make sure I fit. And maybe those are all things that you love, and that's awesome. But again, it's this question of like, how can we support one another? It's not that we're trying to fix you. We're not trying to fix you, and we're not trying to change you. But the goal is, how do we build community so that as women, we don't create more barriers for one another, right? We face enough barriers, and what ways can we support each other in that journey? Let me have a look at the chat. Fantasy, did you want to share something?
Oh, sorry. I had just put it in the chat. So I identify as a Black feminist, and a fellow Black feminist, Brittany Cooper, wrote a book called Eloquent Rage. It's like basically becoming like how she started to identify herself as a Black feminist. But she says individual transformation is neither a substitute nor a harbinger for structural transformation. And so basically how I take that is, even though, you know, there are things that we could do, like developing like these community support systems, or, you know, even helping put language to some of the things that, like, because me going to like feminist events or like Black events or whatever helped me get language for the things that I was experiencing. So even if that is the simple goal here, or just building community, that's all that we're actually advocating for in this particular space. Our job is not to try to make you the one single point person for systemic change for your organizations or for your teams. We hope that through your involvement here, even the fact that we're even able to engage in this type of dialogue without feeling judgment or without feeling, you know, disgraced or feeling like, you know, oh, well, maybe this is like not just our issue. A lot of the things that you're saying, that everyone is saying, that we're saying, have been experienced by the majority of us on this call. And that's pretty evident by what's happening in the comment boxes. And even if we're here to just provide you a space to discuss things like this and to openly be able to talk about how we can share, different ways that we have handled these situations, and you choose whichever one works for you. And if it doesn't, then that's fine as well. But at least here, we just want to create a community and a support system for you. It's not, our job is not to be trying to tell y'all, all right, everybody go out and go to your male counterparts and tell them they're sexist. That's not that's not our goal here. That's all I wanted to share.
Thank you for that. So I want to shift gears a little bit, and I do want to put a little bit more context to this, because I do think that, our goal is to feel empowered to understand the systems that may be affecting us, and they can all affect us very differently. And so this, to me, was an incredible teaching tool when I first began to learn about it. And so I wanted to share it with you, because we don't often always see the way in which we are experiencing things in life and the way in which they affect us. So first of all, it's called the 4 Eyes of Oppression. And Casey put a chat into a really cute video if you want to dig in a little deeper. But these 4 eyes, and why we talk about them is, so this graphic shows how systems of oppression work together, how they interact, and how they overlap. And so oppression, this is the combination of prejudice and power that creates a system that discriminates against some groups. And it benefits other groups, right? So examples of these systems are sexism, racism, classism, ageism, heterosexism, anti-Semitism, all of these things. These are the systems, and they're designed by people and they are upheld by people. And so it's important for us, no matter what identities we hold, we could be, without paying attention to it, deeply complicit in upholding some of these systems. And so, but we also want to know the ways in which these systems affect us. So the 4 types are ideological, interpersonal, institutional, and internalized. And so ideological, it's the foundation of these 4, and it's the idea that one group is superior to another. And they create this sort of dominant narrative about a group, saying sort of us versus them. So even the fact that we have this meeting, it's rooted in an ideological sort of belief that has consistently and perpetually excluded and marginalized women and people of color from engineering and technology, right? Whether we believe those things to be true, they become these unconscious beliefs that people have held for a long time. And then they are manifested through the interpersonal. So interpersonal interactions, these are how those ideologies are played out on our daily interactions, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And it includes the implicit biases, the micro messages, the perpetuating or not interrupting stereotypes, or people who aren't recognizing power and privilege. So the next are institutional oppression. And so institutionalized oppression, this creates that system of invisible barriers that limit people based on their membership in certain social identity groups. And so examples of institutionalized oppression are things like gender pay gap, right? That is institutionalized oppression. And the barriers, they're generally only invisible to people who are seemingly unaffected by it. So if you don't have one of the, target identities or marginalized identity, you don't see the barriers because they don't affect you, right? And so this institutionalized oppression, it occurs when we have these established laws and the customs and practice that systematically reflect and produce the inequities based on one's membership in targeted social identity groups. And so again, it's important to recognize the ways in which institutionalized oppression can be built into our organizations. It can be built into our hiring practices. It can be built into our evaluation, how we pay and promote people. Institutionalized oppression can also be a sort of manifestation of some of the office work that was part of the chat. So that comes off as an interpersonal, but if it becomes sort of institutionalized, where most women are getting promoted to things that are on the non-technical ladder, that can become an institutional policy or a way of operating that's based on ideology that's manifested in our interactions, and it becomes an institutionalized norm. And then finally is the internalized oppression. And this is really important, is that oppression always comes from the outside, right? So all the things that we've talked about, it always comes from the outside. But we can begin as women, or as any person from a marginalized identity, we can become in a place where we have internalized these ideologies, and that we are affected by the interpersonal, we are affected by the policies. And so they all begin to affect us, and that changes how we move through the world, consciously or not. And so these can bring feelings of like self-hate, or believing negative messaging, or feeling powerlessness or despair. And so these are the things that we're up against in the workplace. And so I offer this to give you a way of looking at what you may be experiencing at work, and recognizing what are the ways in which I may have internalized some of these ideologies. What are the ways in which I may be complicit in upholding some ideologies that are actually oppressing me, right? And thinking about what are the ways in which I may be upholding ideologies or having interpersonal behaviors that are oppressing other marginalized groups. All right, so with that in your head, I want us to move to thinking about the kinds of people that we can meet at work. And again, after this, I'm going to put you in breakout rooms to have some more conversation. Now, the kinds of people that we may engage at work are the people, I'm going to go ahead and put them all up here, are the allies and advocates. So Fantasy, you had a great definition of this. You want to talk to this a little bit?
Yes, I can. So in terms of like an ally would be someone who is supportive, but they tell you that they're supportive. They're more supportive through their words, not necessarily their actions. So an ally would be someone that's like, oh, hey, like I see, you're Black Lives Matter. Cool. Like they have the sticker on their door. That's nice. An advocate would be someone who is, if they see something happening, they're like, oh, well, this award is coming out, I'm going to support, because I see Fantasy as like being a valuable member of our team, and I see that she doesn't get the recognition she deserves, I'm going to recommend her for this award at work or something like that. That would be an advocate. You also have like co-conspirators, which will kind of go into the champions one. Did you want me to go into that one too, Megan? Yeah, so then the champion to me is like the co-conspirator. The advocate, they will do things to help promote you as long as there is no risk to them. Like as long as there's no direct risk to them. So if the risk would be like, for instance, if y'all were all in a meeting and someone said something sexist to your fellow sorry, I'll get so excited. Your fellow woman peer, and you don't speak up, but then you go outside of the meeting, you go back and you're like, oh, like that was wrong. Like they shouldn't have said that to you. I would be like, girl, don't come talk to me because you should have said something in the meeting when they were saying all of this stuff to me. Why didn't you say something then? And it's not that either one is bad, an ally or an advocate. It's just like processes that you have to work through. And there are just levels to it. So like an ally, again, would be someone who just verbally affirms you, things like that. Advocate would be someone who acts on your behalf as long as there's no threat to them. A champion would be someone who is, I would speak up in the meeting. If someone says something sexist to you, I am going to say something in the meeting, even if it has consequences to me. Just because I feel like you don't deserve to be treated that way. So I'm going to say something regardless of whether anyone says something or not, or whether I get good backlash, whether I get backlash or whether I get, whatever for it. I mean, then a cheerleader is just really someone who supports you. They are your biggest, cheerleaders. They're your biggest cheerleader. Like you are the team and they are the ones on the sidelines cheering you on regardless of what is happening. As long as it's something positive for you, they are there to cheer you on. Or did you want me
Thanks,
to go
Fantasy. Yeah, so I always think of champions and cheerleaders as people who, somebody used the term recently called, feeling like you're in someone's slingshot. They're not just helping you, like they're intentionally trying to put you into orbit and to give you lots of opportunities. And these are the people who are consistently elevating you and lifting you up. The last one is, I have put in quotes, queen bees and wannabes, and it's from Rosalind Wiseman's book here, which is the origin of the movie Mean Girls. And so one of the things that I experienced in industry is feeling like there were some particular women who were competitive in like weird and ineffective ways. And look, I'm competitive. Was a 3-time national champion powerlifter again. So like by any standard, I'm competitive. But when it came to seeing some things at work, like there was this notion of what queen bees mean is this notion of like, there can only be one of us, right? And so it's often an unconscious way in which people push others down in order to elevate themselves. And I will tell you that when I think about some of my sort of like how I have been sort of wired and raised, is that I have some queen bee behavior in me, and that I have to consciously make sure that I am not acting in those behaviors, that I am always trying to be the champion and the cheerleader for those people around me. And for me, especially, and why I am so grateful to get to surround myself with amazing women like Fantasy and Kathleen, is because I want to be that champion and that cheerleader for other people. And so when we think about the barriers that we face at work, or the barriers that some of us may face, we want to figure out, how do we not be part of the problem, right? When we think about, the teams that we're on, and, think about the story that Fantasy shared, or the story that Kathleen shared, or that any of your colleagues have shared here today, how do we intentionally help bring people in from the margins? How do we make sure that the activities that we choose to do as a team, that the things that we choose to talk about aren't just what we want to talk about? How do we, again, give someone else the mic and make sure that we're bringing in lots of other ways of knowing and doing? So we want to put you into a breakout room now. And so let's go to groups of 3. So if you can help us get this set up, Casey. What I want you to think about, we're going to give you 10 minutes and the group here. So take 10 minutes. I want you to think about, and I'm going to send you some additional prompts to think about, but I want you to think about the ways in which you've experienced the 3 kinds of people, and what ways might you be employing some of those unsupportive behaviors, and then what ways can you choose to intentionally be that champion and cheerleader for other marginalized or traditionally excluded people around you. And so when you come back, I'm going to have a poll ready for you to give me your thoughts on how you want us to direct our conversation next month. And so if you want to think about that a little bit during your conversation, that would be great as well. But again, what I offer to you today is to think about, when we are on the teams that we're on, right? And instead of always trying to, like me, trying to fit in, or like Fantasy, trying to push herself further to the margins, how do we find our scene and find our people, right? And so that might mean that we participate in employee resource groups. That might mean that we intentionally seek out different kinds of relationships with different mentors. So think about that as we go into the group. All right, Casey, do you have us ready?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, we'll see you back in 10 minutes. I want to give an open mic to any sort of salient points that came out of your conversation, or key takeaways that you'd like to share with the group.
Hey, this is Surbhi. I'll start. I think in our group, one thing that came up was that we need to value ourselves, and we need to be our own champions. And I loved that. And I just wanted to share that. I think Natada, she shared that with us. So, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. What else?
We talked about that. This is Janine. We talked about when some of the challenges are high up in the organization, oftentimes you have a hard time having champions because people are worried about stepping up. and that impacting them. And I thought that was interesting
Yeah, thanks.
and
Janine.
true. Yeah.
That goes to what Fantasy was saying, is like people can be our allies and advocates, but when there's risk to them, do they step up? Yeah. What else?
One of the things my roller derby league is a 403c nonprofit, and we created a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. So it's anybody that wants to join. And our primary objective is to not only make sure that our league is, following and enforcing certain values, but also we want to take some of the work off of, skaters of color, skaters of certain religions, ethnic backgrounds. We have a lot of non-binary skaters. So we've created like a spreadsheet for when people basically want someone to educate them on something, we just direct them to this. And we're like, hey, this committee's compiled a list of books and TV episodes and podcasts and articles. And so, if you want to get educated on something or you don't understand something, go here instead of asking a skater of color or a Jewish skater. And then we also put together presentations, and we give presentations to educate the league, and we consult with any skater, who's, if we're doing one on anti-Semitism, we consult with our Jewish skaters, but we don't put the work on them. We make sure that the committee handles the work. And basically that frees up, skaters in, certain affected groups so that we're educating the league, but the work's not on them. And it's cool because everybody on the committee basically has to pick a topic they feel they're undereducated on. They do the research, they present it. And so it's kind of a nice way of, and then, other white cisgender skaters hear things from white cisgender skaters. And it's not just, oh, this is a member of a minority group that's, so we found that to be really successful, and we've started sharing it with other leagues.
Devin, thanks so much. What I love about what you just shared is that it encourages us to continue learning, right? And it puts the onus on us to recognize there's always more that we can learn and ways in which we can grow. I had a colleague that once said to me of well, I don't know much about race. I don't know any Black people. And I'm like, well, that's not a good excuse, right? Even if you don't have any Black people around you, one, that's a good question to ask yourself why. But two, there are a million books and movies and Twitter feeds that you can follow. There's no excuse to not begin to listen and understand the experiences of other people. Okay, so I put a prompt on the screen. What kinds of topics or activities would be most valuable to you for the April 7th event? So I really would encourage you to all right, so real-time feedback on the 4 hours interprofessional conversation, how we can educate those around us on our needs, ways to grow, how can we support each other, how to release and let go of the past. What else? I'm going to leave this open so you can continue to chime in. I do want to honor the time that you have committed or chose to be here as 90 minutes. I'm able to stay on and continue talking if anybody has some questions or other specific things that you want to talk about. I'm here for you. Kathleen's going to drop off, and some of the others may as well. But again, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for your contributions to the space. I want to encourage you to stay in touch and let us know how we can continue to support you in this. My goal is to provide you resources on other things that you can continue to learn. We can't solve all the world's problems in 90 minutes, but we do hope to provide you some tools and strategies that you can take with you. So with that, again, thank you so much. I'm gonna, Casey, if you could grab the chat, the evaluation link. Oh, you already did there. Thank you for that. All right. So I'm going to leave the meeting open. If you have any questions, what's on your mind, talk to us and tell us what's on your mind. If you want to talk through some of these ideas that you have for next time, I welcome those as well.